All right, guys. So this episode is still very Captain America Brave New World centric, and we're going to talk about all these different things, right? You know, a post-mortem, in a sense, more like a revisiting of Captain America Brave New World, how it fits into the MCU, all these different things, the post-credit scenes. But one thing that I think people are the most curious about, and, you know, rightfully or wrongfully, it's just become a source of curiosity, is how has this movie changed throughout its production? Because it's no secret at this point that there were some changes to the film. I mean, like I've been saying, Giancarlo Esposito, and people are not denying this within Marvel, he was inserted during the reshoots. The post-credit scene, we'll talk about that in just a second. JULIUS ONAH, the director, said, yeah, we shot the post-credit scene during reshoots. However, he asserts that it was always going to be that way. And this is an extensive interview. The Wrap did an extensive interview with director JULIUS ONAH. And I think there are a lot of fascinating nuggets in here that we can talk about. Again, I think it's worth pointing out context, right? Because we're going to dive into this. We're not going to talk about every single answer to every single question. I just think there are a couple, or maybe 3 to 4 very interesting nuggets that we can dive into. I think it's worth pointing out. I'm not saying JULIUS ONAH in this interview is lying about anything. He talks about a whole lot of things: the reshoots, the post-credit scene, I believe, and the process of making the film, what he watched, you know, in the MCU before making this film, all that kind of stuff. Great. We're not going to touch on all of that. I think it's important because I'm not saying he's a liar, right? That's not at all what I'm saying. But context is important, and if you're a filmmaker, first of all, just talking about your own project, I think you're gonna, you know, talk about it in a more positive way. And again, I'm not somebody who hated Captain America Brave New World, but I just think, you know, you kind of have to look at it in a way where I'm not saying he's just defending it blindly, right? But I think that, you know, you're in a position where he's in a position, ONAH is, where he would want to give reasons, justifications for all the questions and things that are being asked of him in this interview. So that's all fine. And the other thing about that too is that this is Marvel, right? So even if he had a terrible experience and whatnot, I don't think he can just outright say that while the film is in, you know, the middle of its box office run. I think that would completely tank its chances of even making close to even, right? And so I think that Marvel probably has him, you know, you can't talk about this thing, can't talk about this thing. And again, it's not like there's necessarily tons of secrets, you know, going around here, but I think that it would be, we'd be remiss if we didn't give that context. So this isn't gospel. This isn't truth with a capital T. This is just JULIUS ONAH's, thoughts on this from a very specific point of view. That being said, like I said, there are some very interesting nuggets here that I wanted to touch on. So we're not going to read the direct answers because this podcast segment would be hours long if we did that. But I'm gonna paraphrase his answers here. You can go check out the article on the Wrap. It's a very long interview, not very long, just a decently long interview there. And then we'll talk about some of the things as I scroll through this interview. So first of all, let's talk about the reshoots and the changes. So the first question that I want to tackle is the fact that this interviewer was saying, how did the story change, right, from beginning to end? And the answer that ONAH gives is that it was more of an evolution, right? So the question is really, you know, we know that this movie changed, but ONAH is really like, well, sure. I mean, the screenplay foundation is the foundation that we build this film off of, but we changed some things. It evolved to where it became a little more grounded, and I think, you know, the character of Sam Wilson had a more personal arc, and so those things were evolving as the movie went on. But I think that it's interesting because ONAH is like, yeah, I mean, I don't see it as an overhaul. I just see it as an evolution of the film. He doesn't really get into positive, negative, otherwise, but I think that it's implied that he's like, no, this was just the process of the film. Okay, so that's interesting. Second thing is Giancarlo Esposito coming in as Sidewinder, because again, it's clear that he's not denying it in this interview that he was inserted during the reshoots. And the answer he gives is actually quite interesting because I think it was pretty clear, based on all the interviews and things now, that Seth Rollins' character, Seth Rollins being a WWE star who was originally in Captain America Brave New World, was the original Sidewinder. And Rosa Salazar was playing another member of the Serpent Society, but both of them got cut. And I don't know if this is confirmed, but Seth Rollins was the character, the Sidewinder, that was replaced. You know, he was replaced, and Giancarlo Esposito stepped into the role. And basically, what ONAH says here is that they really wanted to go with a more grounded approach. And so probably, he doesn't say this outright, but probably the original cuts of the film had a more comics accurate, you know, snake costume, super powered, super villain kind of role for the Serpent Society. And probably at the beginning, that opening action sequence, honestly, I don't know if it would have changed too much in terms of just its placement in the story. I think it probably just was more fantastical. He talks a lot about the fact that, there are heightened characters, right? And heightened material. And I think he's referring to just more fantastical and more, you guys suspend your disbelief a little bit more, right? And so I think that, it's very clear that Giancarlo Esposito's character was just kind of a soldier, right? I mean, I don't know if he has superpowers or superhuman abilities. It doesn't seem like it in the movie. But again, I think that, it makes sense that I think the picture that we're getting here is that originally there was just a more, comic booky character, right? Comic book accurate Serpent Society, and just wasn't fitting with the film. So they decided, let's go a different route. That might be, honestly, where all the reshoots came from. Maybe the original was Sam Wilson fighting against a bunch of alien super soldier snake creatures, and they were like, yeah, not working. And so they replaced it. So that's my takeaway from that comment. He also talks about, the interviewer talks about the fact that, so there were, costume designs for Isaiah Bradley and Ruth. There were costume designs for the leader that looked a little bit different. If you remember, there was a more normal looking version of Tim Blake Nelson who had a beard and just a little bit of a taller, bigger head. And the interviewer asked, so what happened there? And I think, again, the answer is kind of similar. It's just trying to thread the needle, is what Onah says about being grounded and making sure it fits the movie, while also kind of alluding to those comic book origins. So again, to me, what this says here is a very similar thread of probably in an original cut of the movie, there was a lot more comic bookiness as things developed. But I think that what happened was Onah took a look and he was like, or Onah or Marvel or somebody took a look at it. Maybe this was, this part of the Kevin Feige overhaul. And he was like, no, it just has to be more grounded. And so they I don't know if, changing the leader's big forehead to a brain, I don't know, bald cap or whatever they use to do the prosthetics. I don't know if that's more grounded necessarily, but, maybe having less of the heroes like Isaiah and Ruth like flying around in superhero costumes and whatnot. Maybe that's why Isaiah was really not present in the second half of the movie. So again, there is that. And finally, they talk about the fact that, what are the mandates that Marvel gave you? And he was like, no real mandates, it's just we developed the story and we went from there. And then from there, it's a matter of, okay, how does Sidewinder, fit into the future of the MCU? He talks about the fact that Sidewinder is definitely, or not definitely, but, he says something like stay tuned to see where we go from there. And of course, with the inclusion of Bucky Barnes in the film, that's definitely going to be a big part of the Thunderbolts, and it's going to be a natural lead-in and whatnot. And so again, it's just talking about the fact that, the Daredevil people said the same thing, right? Scar Pain said the same thing, because he was like, I just wrote the story, and then if we butted up against the MCU's bigger story, we were told to back off, but it wasn't that often. So that is that. Sorry, I should have mentioned one other thing I mentioned before at the beginning. He talks about the post-credit scene, and apparently, yes, it was always the plan to have the post-credit scene be an allusion to Doomsday, and it was always the plan to have the post-credit scene be the leader in the raft talking to Sam Wilson. It's interesting, though, because in that post-credit scene, we don't see Thunderbolt Ross explicitly, and feels like that was still part of the version of the movie where Thunderbolt Ross was dead, because I think it's pretty clear that Thunderbolt Ross died in a previous version of this movie. And so anyways, he talks about the fact that, they planned to shoot that scene or like the entire time from the very beginning. They planned to shoot that post-credit scene during additional photography. And so, AKA reshoots, right? And then they did it. And so that's why they shot that scene in reshoots, but it wasn't because something was a mistake or they had to add something in. Again, I don't know how much of that I believe or buy into. I mean, it feels a little weird to me. So again, that's why I gave all the context at the beginning of this segment, because I think it's really important that we take all of those things into consideration and just sort of parse out, okay, what is the director saying and how is he saying it? So again, all these different things are up in the air. But anyways, guys, I found this, I think the takeaway here, right, because we can parse through all the different things of what is true, what is not true, what is PR speak and whatnot. I think what I am taking away from this, though, in general, is that there is a version of Captain America Brave New World that is very comic booky. Right, Sidewinder and Diamondback in the Serpent Society are just wearing snake costumes or have snake designs or whatever, maybe even spitting venom or what. I don't know much about the Serpent Society in the comics, but you know what I mean, right? Much more comic book accurate, right? There's a version of that movie. There's a version where Isaiah and Ruth have superhero costumes and they're running around in the final act, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe Marvel just took a look at that and said, this isn't working. Whether or not it was part of those test screenings that have been rumored for all this time, which I just generally don't buy into those reports, generally speaking, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe it'll come out that was in fact true, but maybe that's what they were referring to. They were like, what is this movie? Why is it so oddly tonally dissonant, where Sam Wilson is a very grounded kind of hero in a sense, right? And you have all these different weird things going around. Who knows, right? Who knows? So anyways, I think that is really interesting to point out there. Guys, what do you think of these comments from director Julius Onah that the film changed, right? But it was all just sort of part of the process. And what do you guys think really did change from the original cuts and the original scripts to the film that we got? Let me know in the comments down below.